person from our marketing department is monitoring the comments section. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in, and we will be responding to them. Because intercompany transfer is a very popular subject, we have had a lot of emails with questions regarding ICT. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to have frequently asked questions about the ICT. So let us begin with a quick disclaimer. Beaver Immigration is a consulting company. We cannot guarantee anyone a visa, nor do we act on behalf of the Canadian government. Just quickly about Beaver Immigration, we're a South African-based company. I am Nicholas Avramis. I am the head consultant here as a Canadian citizen living in South Africa. We have offices here in Johannesburg, here in Rosebank, in Toronto. Well, we have clients around the world, in South America and Europe, and a few in China. The bulk of our client base is here in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. We primarily focus on business immigration. Of course, we do skilled workers and a lot of study permits. And we are regulated by the Canadian regulator, ICCRC, and we are a member of CAPIC. And currently, I'm the only regulated Canadian immigration consultant permanently residing in South Africa. So I just wanted to give everyone an agenda of today's presentation. It's going to start with a quick overview of Canada. We're going to talk about the state of Canadian immigration as it continually evolves. Then we're going to talk about the intercompany transfer work permit, demystify some of the myths and delve into the technical requirements, and then talk about the actual work permit, and then how to transition to permanent residency, and then we'll have a brief time for Q&A. So as many of you know, Canada is the 7th largest economy in the world, valued at $2 trillion. Pre-corona, we had an aggregate of 3% year-over-year growth in real dollars. Inflation is very low in Canada. It has traditionally been low since the 90s, at around 1%. Unemployment is around 5%. Canada spends an awful lot of money on healthcare, in national aggregate about $250 billion Canadian. The biggest economic issue and social issue in Canada right now is our low population base, which is at 37.7 million. Canada has a large social spending budget. We have an aging population, which means we have a lot of expenditures, but a dwindling tax base. So in order to address the needs of the Canadian economy, the Government of Canada has announced new immigration level plans. So by the end of 2023, the government wants to admit 1.3 million new permanent residents. So the quota for the end of this year is to admit 411,000 new permanent residents. So from last we've heard, they're very close to meeting this target. They're around 300,000 or 320,000. So people are very confident, despite the slowdown with COVID, that they will meet that target. In 2022, the permanent residency target is 421,000, and in 2023, in the final year of this multi-year program, the quota is 430,000. So that's roughly about just over about 1.3 million new permanent residents, which will come through a variety of streams, but the bulk of them will come through economic immigration. Okay, and economic immigration is a catch-all for skilled worker, business investment, job offers, something that Beaver Immigration does a lot of work in. So it's important to understand, for those of you who aren't very familiar with Canada, that Canada is a nation of immigrants. We are in our fifth wave of immigration. The last time Canada let in this many immigrants in a short time frame was after the Second World War. I know there's a lot of anxiety, especially in the South African market, about xenophobia, but one must not be worried about xenophobia attacks in Canada. As 72% of Canadians think immigration adds to the economy and benefits the social fabric of the country. And it's important to appreciate that 22% of the current population is composed of landed immigrants. Simply put, that means 1 in 4 Canadian citizens were not born on Canadian soil. So let's quickly talk about why Canada promotes business immigration, because it is a key pillar of the Canadian government's policy overall for economic growth, and it's a key plank within the actual immigration framework. It brings a lot of money into the economy in terms of direct foreign investment. When small, medium-sized enterprises come to Canada, overall, it makes a large percentage of the tax revenue collected by the government. New Canadian companies from overseas create a bulk of jobs and drives innovation. It helps boost trade and diversity. And a big part of the reason why Canada promotes business immigration is, as I've mentioned, Canada has an aging population. So many of the small businesses, and when I mean small business, it could be from revenue of 100,000 up to $1 million, or $1 million rand up to 10 million rand. These people, business owners, are retiring, so somebody has to come in and fill those gaps. So let's start talking about intercompany transfer. Intercompany transfer, conceptually, a lot of people understand what that means. It's that you have an existing company in jurisdiction A, and you want to move a component of that to another jurisdiction, another foreign jurisdiction, okay? Or you have a foreign company that wants to acquire another company, another jurisdiction, and transfer employees, okay? In the simplest sense, that's what it is. However, Canadian definition is what matters here. So the way the Canadian government views it is an intercompany transfer work permit is designed to facilitate the transfer of employees from an existing foreign-based company to a related Canadian company, okay? And the reason the Canadian government allows this and creates, let's say, the legal mechanism, which we're going to explore, to facilitate this, is they want to encourage and allow for the expansion of industry knowledge and specialized of skills into the Canadian economy and labor force, which is an important point which we'll get into. Now, it's critical to understand that not every foreign employee is eligible for an intercompany transfer, okay? The government defines 3 types of employees or classes that would be eligible. First is an executive, okay? Somebody at the VP level, senior staff, who has enterprise control, significant component, maybe even equity of the company, a general higher level executive of the company would be eligible. Then you'd have a senior manager, okay? This could be a managing director, mid-level to senior staff, somebody obviously who oversees employees, has autonomy, executive level decision making, that sort of thing. Then there's kind of a broad catch-all category for specialized worker. Somebody who has some type of specialized knowledge of the business or service with an advanced level of expertise in the enterprise and processes or procedures. Basically, somebody in the company that can only do what they do, okay? And again, it's very broad in terms of scope, and usually specialized worker is somebody with like technical skills. We usually see this in the IT. They have some type of technological expertise in the company, in the R&D, something like that. Or they could be somebody, we've done one where they're actually the person who goes around and trains onboard staff, okay? So again, there's not a specific mold for this position. So in terms of the eligibility for a foreign-based company, the key thing to remember when we're looking at an ICT, the first thing we do at Beaver is we have to ascertain if the company is eligible for an ICT to Canada, okay? Now it's important to understand that the rules surrounding intercompany transfers, they're gray in the legislation, or let's say the regulations rather, okay? For instance, there's no minimum requirement, investment requirement for a company. Nor does it list how big revenues have to be for a company, okay? How many employees the company has to employ overseas. There's basically common sense has to be applied, and it's really up to the visa officer, okay? But there are certain rules that have to be met, okay? And this is where, you know, Beaver's knowledge of the system, of what can work and can't work comes to play. But let's talk about some of the hard rules in terms of analyzing whether a company would be eligible for an intercompany transfer. The first thing is the foreign company. Let's say the company is based in South Africa, foreign company. It has to own at least 51% of the new Canadian company that's created or purchased, okay? The key thing to remember, and one of the most important things in intercompany transfer is, does the foreign company, okay, have the financial capabilities to start operations in Canada, okay? And this includes being able to cover the transferee's salary. So this is one of the most fundamental points in intercompany transfer, okay? Because we see this a lot in the practice, okay? If you own a small business, let's say a butcher shop, or a spaza shop, or a corner store, let's say in Johannesburg, or Nairobi, or Lagos, you're probably not a good candidate for an intercompany transfer, even though they try, right? And people do try. Basically, your company, in terms of what you're proposing to do, has to be commensurate to your intentions in Canada. For instance, if you're a manufacturer of, let's say, pulp paper, and you have significant operations here in South Africa or another country, you know, of, let's say, $10 million, okay, and you want to start operations in Canada, there would have to be some type of scalability in Canada, okay? So would you want to have a budget of 100,000? Probably not, you know? You probably want to start somewhere saying you're going to go in with a budget of 250,000, 500,000 Canadian, right? Like, what is it you plan to do? Well, you're going to start with opening an office. Maybe you're going to start by, you know, buying operational equipment, a factory, and all of this has to be put into your business plan, okay? And this kind of brings us to our third point, is there has to be some market research. Have you done your homework for what you want to do in Canada, okay? The other key thing that the visa office is looking for and Canadian officials are looking for is with the new company that you want to establish or purchase, what are your plans to hire Canadians? Okay. Now, believe it or not, intercompany transfers have a high rate of success for being accepted, because you are bringing a foreign employee to Canada for a job that doesn't exist. But they still want to see that you are going to create genuine economic activity. As part of that activity, they want to see you're going to hire Canadians. Okay? Again, there's no set rule of how many Canadians you have to hire. It'd be a good idea to hire one, but you better have a staffing plan. Okay? The other key point is the foreign-based company should have been in operations in the foreign country for at least 12 months. So I know in the past, some people have tried to create numbered companies in their home country and transfer it over. No. The visa office is going to look for a track record of success in the home country, okay? And the other key thing is the foreign-based company must always stay operational in its foreign-based company. So in terms of the eligibility for a employee, the actual employee to be transferred, the key thing is that that employee must be working for the foreign company for at least 12 months, okay? Now we sometimes, happens here at Beaver, of a friend may know somebody at a company and they want to transfer them, quickly hire them and then try to open up a Canadian office. No, the visa office is going to look for an employment history and your track record with the foreign company. The other key thing is when the foreign employee is sent to Canada, they're going to be obligated to open up a Canadian office with a Canadian address. Working from home is unfortunately not an option. The other thing is the foreign employee will obviously, pass medical clearances, not have a criminal record. In other words, not be inadmissible. While English and French testing is not a requirement, the visa office is going to look that they are proficient in at least one of Canada's official languages. Again, no English or French test is required, but you are going to have to demonstrate your language proficiency in one of the languages as a demonstration that you have the ability to conduct business in Canada, okay? And the other thing too is they're going to want to see what skills is this employee bringing to Canada. And this brings us to kind of the technical aspect of the intercompany transfer, which is what makes this all possible. So let's just take a step back and understand something. Anytime a foreign national wishes to enter the Canadian labor market, in order to be eligible to apply for a Canadian work permit, okay, to work for a Canadian company, you first have to obtain what is known as a labor market impact assessment. Every industrialized country has their own version of this. Essentially, a labor market impact assessment is a document from the Economic Ministry where the Canadian employer has to go advertise the job and provide rationale that there's no Canadian, able or skilled enough to do this job, okay? Thus, the necessity to bring in a foreign worker. However, through Canada's International Mobility Program, okay, under Canadian interests and significant benefits, there's something known as the C12 work permit, okay, under the regulations 205A, okay, which allows an exemption, okay, for foreign workers being transferred for a company, from a foreign company. So, before we can apply for this intercompany, this C12 work permit, we first have to get this exemption for a labor market impact. So all those things I mentioned before about, you know, vetting the foreign business and meeting those, you know, official rules and unofficial rules and almost passing the sniff test, we need to get this exemption code, okay, in order to apply for that work permit, okay? That's the key thing to understand. So, again, eligibility for an employee, we kind of I touched on this before. Another key thing that I did want to touch on is when you apply for the work permit will be issued for 1 year, okay? You can reapply for a C12 work permit for up to 7 years. So you keep on rolling it over, okay? But what people fail to understand or don't fully appreciate is the intercompany transfer from the Canadian government's perspective, or the Immigration Ministry or IRCC, obviously it's a temporary work permit, but they view it as a closed loop system between the foreign company and the Canadian subsidiary, okay? So the foreign worker is coming to the Canadian branch, okay, to kickstart trading, operations, hire Canadian staff, transfer knowledge, okay? And then they're leaving. They're going back to their home country, okay? So as part of the work permit application, we have to demonstrate that they have ties to the home country, okay? And what I'm about to tell you next is probably the second most important thing that needs to be understood about the intercompany transfer. In most cases, the visa office will give you a 1-year work permit, okay? When we go back to apply for your second year, you must demonstrate that you have fulfilled, okay, all of the things you said you were going to do when we first made the application for the C12 LMIA exemption, okay? Now, to be clear, profitability is one of those requirements, is not one of those requirements. Canadian government understands that in a new business, you know, it takes a couple of years to be profitable. Things happen, like COVID, recessions. The government wants to ensure that you've actually engaged in commercial activity. What does that mean? You've actually made some sales, goods or services. You would have for sure had to have hired a Canadian permanent resident or citizen, okay? You've opened up office space, okay? Or, you know, if you're in, let's say, the foods industry, okay, we have some people who have moved, like their food factory or their bakeries, large bakeries, cake factories to Canada. Have you opened? Have you traded? Did you open up a bank account? Did you pay your taxes? Did you pay your VAT? All these things you must demonstrate, okay, to the government. Then they will issue you, they will roll over your work permit, okay? And again, you can keep on rolling over this work permit for up to 7 years. So, the key question is, okay, and one of the most crucial things, and this is the third most important thing, and one of the most important things out of today's presentation, and goes into Beaver's assessment if ICT is right for the applicant, if they want to use it as a conduit for immigration, is how do we transition from being a temporary foreign worker to being a permanent resident in Canada and ultimately a citizen in Canada, right? This is a fundamental point. How do you make that transition, right? Because you only have 7 years on this visa, right? You're basically on the clock. Well, the answer is simple. Essentially, you have to enter the express entry system, which is Canada's pool for selection of skilled workers. It's point system, okay? So the critical thing to understand is when a foreign worker comes to Canada, they're technically working for a Canadian company, okay? And if that's the case, you are gaining points in the point system because you're working for a Canadian employer. So the key thing to fully appreciate, and where Beaver first starts with any client who's thinking of doing an ICT through their existing company, or a company who wants to send workers to Canada, is, and for those employees to stay long term, is what are their points today, and what are their points going to be in a year or two from now, okay? So we have to do an assessment based on their CRS scores, comprehensive ranking scores, right? So we have to look at their core human capital factors, how old they are, their education, how well are they doing on their English test, their foreign work experience, are they bringing a spouse along, skills transferability. And then the key thing to remember with the ICT is that for the first year you work in Canada for a Canadian employer, you'll gain 25 points for your time working in Canada. After 2 years, you'll gain 50 points in express entry. But here's a critical thing. If you come to Canada as an executive, what we call NOC 00, through an arranged employment, you're eligible for 200 points in express entry, which will more or less throw you over the top, as long as you have good core human capital characteristics, and you'll definitely be a good candidate for selection and express entry. So the key thing to remember about ICT is there's a lot of moving parts to it, and in order to have a successful ICT, before any decisions are made, there needs to be a lot of analysis done. There needs to be analysis on the company, whether it has the financial capacity to be eligible for an exemption, okay? Will the actual employee that needs to go over, are they eligible for the C12 work permit? And the third thing to consider is, what is the employee's intention, okay? Do they want to stay in Canada for the short term or long term? If it's a long-term play, okay, and they eventually want to stay and become permanent residents, there has to be a lot of analysis to ensure that 24, 36 months down the road, they can generate enough points in the express entry system to be selected through an invitation to apply for permanent residency. So, these are some frequently asked questions that we always get for ICT. How long does the process take? Because we get a lot of companies here who want to move employees very quickly. Traditionally, ICTs for established companies can happen relatively quickly. Again, these are, especially before COVID. How long does it take? Well, document collection, depending on how prepared the company is with their administrative affairs, will usually take about a month and a half, okay? And then after submission, depending on the home country, the process can take 19 to 17 weeks, okay? How long after my visa can I travel? As soon as you receive your visa from the local visa office, you can fly to a Canadian port of entry and you can pick up your work permit. Can my family join me? Yes. Your spouse or common law partner can join you. They will get an open spousal work permit, and your children can join you as long as the child is under 22 years old. Do we have other questions here? Do you have any questions from the, no? Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions today. Should we just wait if anybody has any questions? No? Okay. So, if you have any questions, please email us at info@beaverimmigration.com. And that wraps up today's session. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today.